Evening, everybody. Welcome to our snug meeting, or cosy, whichever you prefer. What we've got, I'm sure we're going round. It'll be fine. We've got 3 good items tonight. 3 reports we already had. Before we start, usual thing about fire alarms. If it goes, run out there. Because there's no test planned. Apologies, we have a couple. Councillor Pavlik, unfortunately, and Martin Kelly. Any others, please?
It was Councillor Pearson.
Or Councillor Pearson, who's substituted. No?
Councillor Hickley substituting.
Well, Councillor Healing. Right, declarations of interest. We have some, yes.
Just to be clear, I'm the chair of the Yorkland Development Board, so Andrew's been through the report with me already.
Right.
The interest is already noted on my register, but in the context of tonight's discussion, I'm also chair of the board of City of York Trading, which supplies agency staff to the council. If there appears to be a conflict arising, I'll leave the room.
Okay, okay.
There shouldn't be, but I'm
Just in case. Thank you. Any more?
More of a question, really. Given this is the Children's Cultural Community Scrutiny Committee, I've got 2 school-age children. Is that of interest or not?
We've all got kids, you know.
We've all got kids. Good. Well, do we all have kids?
Yes. And I just bought a ticket off the library for the Halloween event next week. Is that cool? Looking forward to it. Any more? That's it? Good. Minutes of the last meeting. Are we all happy with those? Anything from them? No, just a couple of things from me. We have got thanks to Johnny, we set up the task to work with the meeting on the 23rd. Is that correct? Yeah, well done, brilliant, thank you. That's up and running. We've got 2 for the food and security task finish group, which is Councillor Nelson, Councillor Knight, and we've still got a vacancy for that. It's been circulated around asking for volunteers, of which everyone says, yes, I'm keen, but I'm busy. But it is going to start shortly. So if anyone is very keen to get involved in the future insecurity task and finish group, there is room for you. So please step forward. I think that's it on those. And there was going to be a date for the future SCN report. It'll come to us in March the 5th meeting. I think that was it. Everything else was fine. Happy to. So do we pass the minutes? I'll just say we're all happy. Yeah, just approve. Sure. We have no public participation tonight. Skip through that one very quickly. So we'll come to finance and performance report.
Yeah, want me to do a brief intro?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah. So this is the first monitor that the committee will receive this year. I think I'm just looking around. There are quite a number of new faces to me at this meeting. So I think what I'll do is just explain the way we work it with the performance and finance monitors. So the full council report goes to the executive, and that went to the executive in September. And then when we go through the scrutiny, so particularly for this scrutiny, what you get is an extract of that executive report that focuses on the remit of this scrutiny committee. So the report that you've got in front of you just does a little high-level summary of the position for the council, which sets out that at quarter monitor one, we were projecting a high level overspend of just over £11 million for the authority, which clearly is a significant issue for us at this stage in the year. And the report to executive set out some mitigations and a strategy for dealing with that, and some particular actions that were going to be taken at that high level in terms of trying to manage that overspend before the end of the year. What you've then got in the paper, which is probably what you're most interested in, is the directorate analysis for children and education and the elements of communities and culture. That's the remit of this committee. And that starts on page 11 of your paper. So I'm probably just going to focus on that, if that's okay, colleagues, and just have a quick run through the key things on the issues for this committee. So I think the table at table 1 at page 12 is probably a good place to actually start and have a look at, because that just summarises the position that we're looking at. So the right-hand columns on that table show the projected outturn variation. So this is our projection. We call this monitor 1. It's not quite quarter 1. We're normally doing this sort of probably from the middle of June because of the timescales of how we have to lead into the various committees and the executive. So this is probably up to about the middle of June information on that basis. Projections to the end of the year on what we think the outturn is likely to be, or the directorate thinks the outturn is likely to be. You've also got on there the approved budget in the middle columns, so you can see what the approved budget is in the individual AD areas and what the variations are that we're projecting. And then also on the left-hand side, we've got last year's outturn. So you can see where we were in 22-23. And I think for me on here, a couple of figures I'd just like to highlight the members. So halfway down the table, there is a line in bold setting out the Children Education Directorate total. So that's the headline, high level position on the directorate before any mitigations or any one-off actions that have been taken to try and to deal with that. And you'll see that 22-23 outturn, that was about 8.1 million. So there was an 8.1 million overspend on the core directorate activities. And that reflects a position that was similar in previous years. I think it was a little bit lower the previous year. It was more like 6 million, went up to 8 million in 22-23. You'll see that the projection for this year now is down to just over 5 million. So compared to where we were in 22-23, there's been some significant action being taken within the directorate, and particularly since the new management team came in last summer, so just over a year ago. And particular work on looking at managing the number of placements, looking at where those young people are placed, whether they're placed externally within the city to try and get the most efficient placement for those young people. Beneficial for them, but also beneficial on a cost basis, and also significant work on reducing the number of agency staff that have been employed with the directorate, which has been a concern for this committee in previous incarnations in the past. So I think that's the thing I would want to point out to colleagues. What you will then see at the bottom of that is about a £4.5 million net projected overspend for the year. We've got some mitigations of about £500,000, tending to be one-off issues. One-off opportunities around things like reserves and creative use of some of the grant streams that we've got, that we were at the time we did monitor 1, we were proposing to use to help mitigate that position. Clearly we'll be doing lots more work, and the directorate will be doing lots more work, and have been since this monitor was first prepared. We are at the moment working through the quarter 2 monitor based on information up to the end of September, and I think it's probably fair to say that I'm expecting a more favourable, slightly more favourable position when that monitor comes formally to the executive and to scrutiny. Some more mitigations are being developed, and some of the work around managing the placement numbers, and particularly the agency staffing, has moved on a little bit since this first quarter. So it is an improving position even from this as we speak. I'll stop there and open it up for questions and comments.
Thank you, Chair. Can I refer to paragraphs 19 to 23? Or are we going beyond the scope of what you've just been describing? If I refer to paragraphs 19 to 23, are we within the scope of what you've been describing?
Yes.
Right, okay, fine. So, so just talking about the areas of pressure, halfway through paragraph 19, we're talking about a predicted overspend of 2.6 million, which is a significant improvement from the 2022-3 outturn. And I think my question there is, can we maintain that so that that trajectory is downward throughout the year?
I mean, I think from my perspective, the short answer to that is yes, I think that's possible. And I think the work that's been done since this monitor was prepared and what I've seen coming out of the Q2 monitor does show further improvement on that. And then there's also further work in hand within the directorate, particularly around the remodelling of the Wenlock Terrace provision, which we're hoping as well will enable us to retain more children within the city in better provision and at a more reduced cost. And that's slightly more longer term, and that will generate savings towards the end of this year, some of which are factored into this projection, but also into further savings into 24-25 when the full year effects of those may well be realised. So I think the answer, yes, there is.
Okay. Can I ask you if you care to elaborate on paragraph 22 about an overspend in disabled children's services of $500,000? Second sentence says that you've got a specific project being investigated, which will claw back some of the previous payments. So,
yes, there's a couple of things in there. So the first thing is we're recognising there is a pressure in those services. So we're having to manage a greater number of children. So the number of children that requiring those services has increased over the last few years. And the resources and the funding that we've got to deal with that hasn't kept pace with that increase in numbers. So that's one of the things that's creating the pressure. What we've been doing then is just looking at how those funds are being used by the families that are in receipt of those funds. So having a delve into some of those payments accounts. And what we've identified is that there are a number of accounts that have built up a significant reserve. So there's a significant balance in some of those accounts. So what we're looking at then is going through those individual cases and ensuring that we've got the right resources in there. Yeah. So if there is resources in those accounts that isn't required in the short term and medium term for those children, we're going to withdraw that funding and then review the provision that's needed ongoing. So we've got the right amount of money ongoing. So there's two things there. One is short-term one-off saving when we withdraw those one-off balances, yeah. And then the potential for some smaller, probably much smaller if I'm honest, but ongoing savings to ensure that the needs of those children are being met. Being met properly from that direct payment allocation.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, last part of this question, since it is only one question, Chair, about paragraph 23, the last sentence about extension of EHCP eligibility up to age 25 and the costs and more young people accessing that option. Is there a possibility that DfE will actually recognise the real trends here and arrange for some further support for local authorities?
They haven't done fully so far, I suppose is the short answer. There has been some additional resources for the direct provision for those children. So when their actual education provision in the settings that they are being transported to. So we've been working with the DfE on our safety valve agreement to help balance the dedicated schools grant part of the budget, which supports the actual provision for those children, or part of it supports provision for those children. And the DfE have allocated another £17 million to York over a 5-year period. So they have done some additional allocations in respect of that. I think we would argue quite strongly it's still nowhere near enough, and we've still got significant pressures, but you can't say they haven't done something on that. The issue that you've got here in this particular paragraph is that although the provision for those children, the education provision for them comes out of the dedicated schools grant that's allocated by the DfE to the local authority, the transport for those children isn't, and that's a general fund cost. So it comes out of the council's general fund budgets and effectively council tax funds. So as those numbers have increased, yes, there's been more money, a little bit more money put through the DSG. What we haven't seen is the money coming back through the general fund to support the transport of those children. And I think that's some of the areas that we're particularly focusing on at the moment and ensuring that we've got the right transport provision in there for these young people. A significant chunk of that is taxi provision. There are some young people who are accessing bus passes as well to get to that, but that's more of an issue, I think, at the moment, the short-term quick issue around the general fund and the pressure there.
Yeah, I wondered if that was continuing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that many of the policy changes that have been implemented from May last year had taken some time to work through in terms of the investor save principle that I discussed with Debbie. I think my question is the work that was done there and the visibility of those changes, which are about retaining more children within city, to have more permanent members of staff versus agency, which is providing more to reduce the number of changes that young people and families face with staff. That is continuing, which is a good thing to hear. Some of the other changes that you alluded to in terms of the Q2 report that you anticipate bringing to the next, and it's mentioned in paragraph 22. It's understanding the visibility of those changes that will be implemented in terms of public reports, and seeing what changes are happening there. And a brief question on the problems that emerge with the national funding formula that doesn't affect these accounts.
We're focusing mainly on general fund.
Yeah.
We're focusing mainly on the general fund in this paper, and there is a section from paragraph 24 around the dedicated schools grant. So I think, are you referring to the recent announcement?
Yeah, it's understanding the figures that we're seeing today and may say in Q2. It's what you were working to an assumed figure that somehow has been.
What Councillor Waller is referring to is the DfE's allocations for school funding through the national funding formula for schools for the financial year 24-25. So the DfE did an announcement of that in July this year, the first announcement, and then about a week ago backtracked on it very quickly because they'd identified an error in it. They'd underestimated the number of pupils, so they were allocating more funding than they actually had. So they sent out revised allocations of that. It didn't make a significant difference to the level of funding that York schools might have been expecting from the first allocation compared to the second. I think it was about 1.2 million reduction from the first announcement to the revised announcement, which was about a third of the increase. So I think the increase was going to be about 2.8% per pupil. It's now about 1.9% per pupil. So that's the change. I think for me as well, it depends on what schools have been doing with that. So it's less of a case of what's changed from the October announcement from the July one. It's more a case of what schools have been actually budgeted from putting their financial forecasts for 24-25. And that's the piece of work we're doing at the moment, just to assess what that new announcement means in terms of what schools' financial plans are for 24-25. But it's not helpful.
No, it's not. And the work done on the safety valve, that is continuing in order to reach.
It is, yeah. So again, if colleagues probably won't be aware, the safety valve, and we have been running a deficit on the dedicated schools grant. So ring fence grant supports the funding of pupils in schools. It also supports high needs expenditure for children with special educational needs and disabilities, and that's the area where we've had significant pressure. And we were running up until about 2 years ago. We were running a £5 million in-year deficit on an allocation that was only about 18 million at that time. So pretty significant in terms of the level of funding we were receiving. We were clearly struggling to get to grips with that within those resources, and the DfE have recognised that, along with a number of other authorities in a similar position, have entered into what they call a safety valve agreement, which basically means we've had to come up with plans about how we're going to bring our in-year in-year balance on the high needs block of the DSG into balance by 25-26, and this started in 21-22. So over a 5-year period, we've got to manage our resources on a year-by-year basis. And at that point, the cumulative deficit that would have been built up would have been about 17 million at that point. The DfE agreed to write off that 17 million over a period of time, and they've been doing that over the last few years. So I think we've already received 12 million of the 17. We've got another 5 to go if we continue to hit the targets within that plan. And at the moment, we are at that point. There's some challenging things in there, so it's and we're probably coming to the point where some of the most difficult things are going to have to be delivered, but we're on track as it stands.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And there's one or two questions I've already sort of had. I've got a whole list of questions to go through, and thanks to colleagues have jumped in already. Yeah, no, that's good. So I think in a way the other bits of the questions that I wanted to ask, I'm not sure whether they're things that you'll be able to answer directly. Yeah.
Looking at the performance side thing, I'm probably going to struggle without any of the management team from the directorate here, or Ian Cunningham, who wrote that section of the paper. So I can happily take questions away and make sure we get some answers back.
So that was what I was wondering, and whether it's perhaps just worth even just for committee just to kind of be aware and be thinking. So what I was interested in was page 16. Just as a bit of a throwaway at the top of the page, we're looking at the persistent absence rates for secondary school, and that's only being reported annually. But at the last meeting of this committee, we were told that actually we can get almost week by week data on that. So I think we might, as a committee, want to think about whether we want to have a more frequent reporting than annually on that, particularly given all the pressures that there are around attendance. And then I was interested in some of the stuff around looked after children and child protection plans and that sort of thing. So again, I appreciate this might be more to chuck out into the ether than something you can necessarily speak to, but the proportion of children becoming subject of a second or subsequent plan, this is at paragraph 35, and it's showing an improvement, but from what was a pretty high figure. And it's just wanting to understand what that is in relation to our near neighbours, because we do talk about, the national average and the sort of near neighbour averages, but looking at that improvement rate and whether that is coming more into line with similar size authorities. And likewise in paragraph 36, just at the end of the paragraph there, it talks about seeing fewer referrals to children's services. And on the one hand, on the face of it, that's you might think really good, but on the other side of that, is it that we have a higher threshold, or that people are more reluctant to come forward, or, all of those sorts of questions. So I would just be interested to know a bit more information about what we think is driving that, and again, that might be something that as a committee we want to just focus on a little bit more. So I appreciate you might not be able to answer directly, but
I can certainly take those questions back and make sure that answers are circulated for members of the committee.
It's not an answer, but I wonder if I could just throw in my 2 pence worth as exec member. I think that what I would like to see in this report, in this particular section, would be maybe trends over time. Yes, there's some sort of facts in there, but actually, you could easily show that in a graph, couldn't you, really, to sort of say what has been happening over time. Because I imagine, for example, particularly on paragraph 36, where we were talking about referrals to services, you would see certain spikes in the last few years, like post-COVID, for example. I know that this committee in a previous iteration talked quite a lot about that. And obviously, prior to that, during the period of COVID, where children weren't in school as much, the number of referrals was right down. So it'd be good to sort of get a longer term trend. I think that'd be really helpful for the committee to sort of understand a little bit about that. So rather than maybe just, whilst words are always useful and having a bit of information is quite good, I actually think a longer term graph might help you more. I don't know, but a suggestion.
again, I can take that back. I won't, I'm probably not going to commit Ian to anything that he might be unhappy with, but I'll certainly take that back. And it sounds to me, it sounds a sensible suggestion. So.
Thank you. I was wondering about, in terms of obviously the issues of persistent absence and things like that. Is that impacting schools on census day? My understanding of school funding is there is a census day in about October, which is when schools get their per head funding for the year based on the number of pupils in school on that day. And I was just wondering whether there's any scope for, or anything has been done about kind of making sure that heads are in school on those census days that are so important for funding.
Yeah. My understanding is it shouldn't, if the schools fill in the censuses correctly, they should include those children in the numbers that generate the funding. But I can double check that.
That's not been my experience. Just the reason this is in my mind, I suppose, is so I'm a governor of a school in Leeds, which has a very movable population of children, and it's always has a massive impact on their funding, because there are often many children that join after census
If
day.
they join, if the child joins after the census day, they won't be included. I thought you were talking about a child who's joined in at the beginning of September and is absent from school at the time of the census. It would certainly pick those up. A child that hasn't actually been put onto the roll of the school before the census, no, that wouldn't be included, and that can be an issue. We do have particularly some of our rural schools where that's been an issue for them. Some of the smaller ones where we've had transgender communities who have joined afterwards and left, and then they haven't been included on the census, and it has caused an issue. So yes, in that particular case, not if the child was just absent at that point in time.
And so that's not really impacted. It's not having a massive impact.
No, it shouldn't impact on funding.
Two questions. One, well done for getting down from plus 7.5 million to only plus 2.4 million. When I first saw it as plus 20%, I thought, oh, that's bad, but it's actually quite good. It's very good, actually. Given the fact that you do have plans to continue that sort of trend downwards, do you feel that the actual base budget of that budget line needs to go up? Because my understanding is what happens is the base budget is kept lower to encourage officers to find efficiencies, which in this area, 3 million on a 24 million pound budget is very good, actually. Is that the plan? And the exec member might want to come in here, because what seems to happen is every year one-offs are just continuously topping up this budget.
Yeah, and I think
it's about time the base increase.
It's a very, very good question, and you're quite correct in terms of the way as the finance manager, the head of finance for the directorate, I will always, as part of the budget round, estimate what I think the costs are going to be for the directorate during the year, based on what we're currently spending and what I think is reasonable in terms of the directorate's ability to manage, particularly increasing numbers, and put that forward. Clearly, then somebody else has to sit down, and it's the executive that have to sit down and decide where the overall resource for the council gets allocated. Okay. And you're quite right, we won't always get, or it's very unlikely that any individual directorate will get the allocations that they wish. I think, and that generally works and has worked in the past as a methodology for setting council budgets, and it's the way that councils across the country have done it in the past. I think you're probably quite right in saying that at the levels we're at now, it becomes much more difficult, particularly with the squeeze on funding and some of the pressures that we've got in here. So it is much more of a challenge, I think, for this local authority and for other local authorities. And at some point, what we need to do is understand what a reasonable level of base budget, for particularly children's social care is, because that's the key thing here. So, to put it crudely, what's a reasonable level of looked after children within York? What would you expect a city the size of York to have in terms of its core level of looked after children? And are we at that level yet? Can we come down further? Is it going to go the other way? And at that point, you need to gain confidence so that members in the executive particularly can agree that that is the realistic level, and then we can set a base budget at that. And we're not quite at that position at the moment. And I think we're getting there quite rapidly with the new management team. So Martin Kelly has come in, just over a year ago, has done some significant work in terms of trying to work through where we think we are in terms of the base budget position. But I'd say yes, it's I wouldn't suggest it's the 5 million. I wouldn't suggest that it needs to be at that level. It needs to be a lower than that level. It's not zero. It's somewhere in between.
Okay.
And I think it's, you know, it's a debate that needs to be had about where that level is, and it depends how much pressure colleagues want to put on the directorate to manage it.
But I do have supplemental.
Councillor Healy, yeah, you can be on my team. Let's have more money. I think let's raise that base budget. I think that's important for children. They are our future, they're the best of us, and we should be spending as much as we can on them. However, I'm sure that other people in other portfolio areas would say exactly the same thing with exactly the same passionate response about, I don't know, potholes. But the key thing is I think that's actually been quite a helpful response, sir, Richard, is yes, it's clearly not enough, but actually there's got to be that somewhere in between that naught and that 5 million. But I think it's worth also pointing out some of the pressures that the council is under. You know, we have to save £10 million every year over the next 4 years due to a number of things, previous executive decisions, obviously the national austerity that still pervades local government, the fact that we've lost 40% of our budget in the last decade, I think it is. And these are huge issues. And then specifically on children's services, I mean, the Josh McAllister report, which I'm sure you've all read in detail, is a national review into care. And that was, you know, submitted to the government as something that, look, this is what we need to do to update our care system and make it work for young people. And that obviously did ask for more funding as part of that review. And to date, it has been ignored, shall we say, by national government. So I think that's just where I am. I think that it's really, really hard to achieve what we need to do statutorily within this budget. I think we're making really, really good progress, and I'm glad to see that there's definitely a much steadier ship now than there was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. We've still got room for improvement, of course, but I think we're moving in the right direction. But yeah, it'd be great if we had some more money, wouldn't it?
Yeah. That's your job. I'll agree with that. Supplemental, yeah.
Paragraph 23, home to school budget 775. The overspend seems to be remarkably consistent year to year. So again, coming back to the base budget point, there's only so much you can squeeze out of it. 2, are we confident that we're not in the position of Birmingham, that we seem to be paying ridiculous amounts on various taxi journeys, on which I think had been captured by a particular taxi firm? We're confident we're paying appropriate rates. And point, declaration of interest, my daughter actually gets one of these. So
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. Yeah, I think we are pretty confident that we're managing that particular budget particularly well in terms of the costs and the efficiency. In terms of that, we've taken some of the monitoring of that and the direct administration of that in-house recently as well, to try and improve that work from what was previously being done, a chunk of that by the taxi firm. So we've taken that in-house, and that's clearly having some benefits in terms of managing that and getting more efficiency in terms of who's going where, when, and what, and the use of those taxis. So there's always more that can be done. I think the issue from my perspective in there is more the numbers. It's more the numbers of individual children that need to be transported, and particularly, you know, that expansion at the upper age range that was brought in a few years ago, and without funding at that point, and that has caused a major issue, not just for this local authority, but for all local authorities that are involved in transporting the children with those high needs.
Any more questions? I've got 2 then. on 21, legal fees overspent by 218. Was that something happened that he wasn't expecting that badly, or was it?
I think we were expecting that. I did send you a reply to some of those
sorry.
questions that you raised. I think that's the committee were copied in, but that particular one. So again, it's this issue about the budget, and is the budget set at the right level? So the budget for legal fees that we've got and have had for about the last 4 or 5 years, I think is 205,000. So we're projecting an overspend of 218. So we're projecting double of the expenditure compared to the budget. Although on the positive side, if there is one on that large overspend, the overspend was over 400,000 3 years ago. So that has been brought down significantly over the last 3 years to a projection of 218. I think it's just back to that question that we just had. That budget of 208,000 is probably not sufficient given the number of looked after children we currently have and the complexity of the cases. Whether it needs to be increased by another 218, or there's more work that we can do to make sure that we're operating more efficiently in that aspect of the work, then I'm not sure. I think there's probably a bit of both, I would imagine, as usual with these things.
Supplementary on that one.
Can I? I've got my own supplementary first.
Oh, you got supplementary. Oh, go on then. And you got another one. Go on then.
Just excuse my naivety. Can we not insure against some of the things, or just insurance policies just not possible to take out some of the legal?
Yeah, I mean, we maximise what we can do through the insurance contracts that we've got and the insurance arrangements. I think we can be pretty certain we have a dedicated insurance team that will make sure that we're getting the best deal overall in terms of what we insure externally and what we self-insure on these things. So I'm confident that that will be the case.
Thank you. Within that, I'm guessing that legal spend is saving the council money in other places through where there are litigations that the legal advice and legal spend the council are having are then protecting the council from being liable for court fees, etc., in situations where people are bringing cases against them. Is there any way of capturing that kind of potential saving within the financial narrative of the expenditure?
I think it'd be very difficult to try and quantify that. I mean, I'm quite happy to go away and have a look and have a chat with our legal team and see if they've got any suggestions about how we might do that for you to see. I mean, you're quite clearly correct. The work that they do is potentially would save money further down the line where we may get into particular difficulties, just to make sure that we've got the right provision in place at the right time. Yeah, can you leave that one with me, and I'll have a look and see if we're able to do anything on that one for you that might be helpful.
Supplementary to your question, do you try as much as possible to ensure this is an in-house spend rather than an out-house spend? As working in the legal sector, the amount lawyers charge is obscene.
I mean, I think it'll depend on a case-by-case basis. I imagine I'm not an expert on that area, so I'm surmising. I think that where we can, we would use the in-house team, but some of this work and particular cases will be very specialist, and it's probably not cost-effective to be employing people to give some of that sort of more specific and technical advice, and that's where we would go out externally. So I'm assuming that that's the way that would be managed. But again, if you want more detail on that, I'm quite happy to get a response from our legal team to.
No, it's some good questions, actually. I mean, I think that following on from what Councillor Nelson says, there is a potential it will save us money down the line. It is very hard to quantify that. Again, on your point, Councillor Healy, I think that sadly over the last 10 years, it's been I always think of it as like a bit of a game of Jenga, that we've taken out bits of the council, we've taken out council officers, and therefore then it starts to cost us more money because we don't have that in-house service to do certain things. I think Rich is right, actually, that some of this particular stuff that we're talking about could be very specialised, and I doubt that we ever had anyone in-house. So that's something to look at. But no, I think it's worth us going back and having a look at that one and maybe feeding something back to the committee around the questions that you've asked. One thing I think is worth saying is that as we endeavour through various means to reduce the number of children going into care in the first place, and doing more and more work with early help and early intervention wherever we can. That reduces the likelihood of us having to use costly court proceedings and things like that. That hopefully helps further reduce this number over time. And that is a long-term process. You know, the numbers of children in care ballooned in the last couple of years from about 150 odd, something around there, to what we see now around 289, I think it got to at one point. Now it's down to about 260 now. So that, if you think about that extra 100 and the cut proceedings has gone into that in that time, that'll of course added to the problem. So that's something that hopefully with further reductions over time, we can further reduce that situation. But it is a long-term project.
All happy. Oh, Councillor Cuthbertson, one more.
Can I just make one observation, Chair? It's really pleasing to note paragraph 24, where the efforts to meet the safety valve targets are on track. And also the comment where other agencies are helping in early help cases, because that's something where we've had problems in the past. So, well done.
Thank you, Councillor Cuthbertson. That's really nice to hear. It is about partnership work, isn't it? And that's really key to what we're doing. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Just one final thing, and this is really for Councillor Webb rather than yourself, Richard. And it was just really, it's actually something that Councillor Cuthbertson had picked up on paragraph 22 around disabled children's services and noting the comments that were made already. I think if I was the parent of a child who was accessing that services, I would probably be quite anxious reading some of that, and I just would like, you know, to give you the opportunity really to give some assurance that, you know, where we are looking at retrieving budgets, if there's been too much allocated, it will be done in a way that is mindful of the current situation of the children. And in particular, I don't know enough about how these budgets work in detail, but I can imagine that for some families, they'll be anticipating issues coming up, and I would hate for us to be clawing back money that then those families will have to go through a lengthy process to reapply for when actually it would have been there already. So it's just to make sure that that reassurance is there.
Yeah, and I think that's a well-made point, and my understanding is that is the way that piece of work is being done. So some of these balances have been held for a couple of years, so it's looking at that. We're not assuming that all of the balances that we've got there are coming back for the mitigation. It's only a proportion of it. We're assuming that a big chunk of that is still going to be needed, and that's part of the assessment process and the discussions with the family. So it would only be taking funds away that are genuinely not required at that point in time to manage the needs of that child. And then there was the continued ongoing discussion about what the needs are from then onwards. So resetting that if needed. And that, you know, that might be a lower level. It might actually be a higher level. Who knows what that piece of work will show in terms of the needs of those children at that point.
I'll just pop in on that one briefly. I think that I think there's two things to this. For me, it's doing things sensitively, working with the family. You know, we go back to our principles of each that we've got in our authority. I think, you know, this is an equalities issue, isn't it? Often. And that's fundamental to what we want to get right as an administration. So doing things sensitively is key. The other part of this is we don't want to end up taking away something that then means that further down the line, it costs us more to the authority if we're looking at this from a purely financial point of view. So there is no point in, you know, removing everything, because that would obviously lead us to greater problems that lead the council to have to spend more money further down the line. So I think on both points, there's obviously got to be a really rational and sensible approach to this, done in co-production with the families. That's hard, and all of this is really hard, and I'm not wanting to shy away from that. You know, I think that, to be honest, if we look at the safety valve, and I openly asked for us to look at SEND on this committee, and I was really glad that that came up first last meeting. The easy stuff has been done. on the safety valve agreement now. So this is where it's going to get to the hard stuff. And Richard, you said that earlier on. So I think that that's something that we need to be aware of and work well at early on. But thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Richard. You can stay if you like. Are you maybe going for your tea? It's up to you. We've now got Angela Padfield. Oh, my friend. Always a pleasure. Who is it? Paul Cliff. Paul Cliff. Paul, this is Paul Cliff because he hasn't got a name badge.
Paul Cliff, I'm Shared Head of Adult Learning and Skills for City of York and North Yorkshire.
Cool. Thank you. Angela.
Thank you. So this is part of our yearly report to you about how our performance has gone in the academic year that has just gone. It's a bit late reaching you this year because usually we'd come about June, July time, but because obviously there's been lots of changes, that's why we're a bit later. You've asked me some specific questions this year. So I've highlighted access to cultural activities, and I've given you some information there about what we've done over the last year to bring that about and how we do it. We have increased our discretionary rates, our means tested benefits and ways people can access the course. So over the last 3 years, we have increased our learner support funding by more than double to support learners to be able to access courses, get to courses, support with their courses. Also, you've asked a bit more information about special educational needs provision that we provide. So we work with 6 subcontractors for 16 to 25-year-olds with special educational needs, with EHCPs, with those partners with personalised learning plans. We don't actually deliver it ourselves. We maintain the quality of that provision. We make sure it's provided to the highest standard that we can, and we work hard to make sure that nobody is disadvantaged. And then in the final part of the report, I've talked about our language offer because that has actually shrunk over the last couple of years. This is right across the country. It's not just us. We've been speaking to university last year quite a bit about it, who also stopped their offer. I believe they're bringing it back again now, but it is hard to recoup teachers. It's hard to access the right learners. If people aren't going on holiday, they're less engaged to want to learn a new language because they're not getting the opportunities to go abroad and try it. There's lots of reasons why people aren't engaging, but we have put on some new beginners courses which are discounted in yearsly to try and attract new learners to that offer. And that has responded quite well. So we're going to continue to work in that frame. We also introduced British Sign Language a couple of years ago. And that's been very popular as well. Unfortunately, our tutor pulled out this year and we've had to cancel the class for now, and we're on the hunt for a new British Sign Language tutor. And we've been given some pointers as to where to find one. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to get that back up and running next year. We're also looking into lip reading, which is quite a high demand for that as well. And we've been given a name of somebody to contact for that. So we are very invested in keeping languages as part of the offer. We believe culturally it's really important and we want to keep that on our offer. And a lot of adult education providers don't provide it. It's not something I have to provide as such, but I think it fits York. I think it's right for York. And I think it's important that it stays on our offer. We try to do it in a variety of ways, face-to-face, online, blended, which means you might come for the first 2 sessions, you'll do the next 2 at home, and then you'll come back for another 2 sessions and so on, to try and encourage as many people as possible and enable them to engage. And then some do it online only. Certainly through COVID, it was very popular as just online, because obviously it was the only way people could do it, but also it attracted a lot of new learners during COVID because it was something to do. But as people got back to work life and busy lives, that reduced down again. So that's the challenge with languages, basically. Everything's outlined of what we do within Appendix A. which is from page 31. I've tried to fit the different types of offer that we do to the council plan. So safe communities and cultures for all, for example, with, again, modern foreign languages, heritage skills, Isel, community arts, prevent and safeguarding, for example. I'll come back to Isel in a minute. And then if you can see all the different offer that we do, but I thought I would just concentrate on the end of the report on page, getting there, 44. So these are the key areas of focus that we were working on this year. And I'm going to pass over to Paul now, who'll report on the joint working that we've been doing with North Yorkshire.
So as we're heading towards devolution of the adult education budget from 2025-26, there's been increasing collaborative working between York and North Yorkshire in terms of managing the strategic direction of where we are in terms of how we spend our adult education money, and in line with policy changes from central government. So we formulated a joint strategy that we consulted on a year and a half ago now, which we're now working towards, which very much aligns what we do in York Learning with the York 10-year skills plan and with the direction of the skills for jobs policies of the government, but also allowed us to have a real solid position when it came to the publication of the Learning Skills Improvement Plan for York and North Yorkshire by the Chamber of Commerce. And that very much aligns us as the gateway position for a large number of people to enter into adult education opportunities. And that shows that commonality between what happens in York and in North Yorkshire. So that strategy is working, and that's how that started to shape our curriculum. Key to that is engagement, and we've used the Multiply initiative quite significantly in terms of that engagement offer. So Multiply was direct funding to the council separate to our normal adult education budget, that's managed centrally, that enables us to engage people in the use of number and allows us to do some of the things that we're not allowed to do with our current adult education funding. We've been very successful in the use of that in terms of engaging people on ground that they feel comfortable to engage with learning. There is a large proportion of both the York and North Yorkshire populations who don't engage with skills training, who have low qualifications and have got low wages, and actually don't know what they don't know in terms of how much they would benefit from engaging in learning. By enabling us to use things that were factored particularly around improvement in people's lives through cost of living, so healthy eating, healthy living, eating on a budget, managing your bills, those type of things. It provided an opportunity for people to see a relevance to learning. That allowed us then to develop their confidence in the use of number. So we gave that great big reveal, ta-da, did you know you were actually doing maths, even though you didn't, without mentioning the big horrible M word, which some people find terrifying. So that sort of taking learning to where people feel comfortable and providing that gateway is key to our strategy, and Multiply has enabled us to deliver against that. I've mentioned the Learning Skills Improvement Plan. So I was able to hold a board position alongside a number of other officers from both councils and local businesses and the university in shaping what was the Learning Skills Improvement Plan for York and North Yorkshire, which identifies the key areas of development in terms of the skills needs of businesses. But what we were able to do by our involvement is articulate that it's great to say these are the skills needs of businesses, but if nobody is going to do the training, then you may as well not do it. If you build it, they will come type of situation. So the LSIP for the region very much focuses on that pipeline gateway opportunity approach. So we were able to get that real buy-in from that involvement. We then had to publish an accountability agreement, which has again been through a variety of council committees, that demonstrates what we are going to do in York Learning in terms of response to that LSIP. But because the strategy was very much integrated into that, it basically meant that we do more of that reinforcement, taking learning to where people feel comfortable to enable them to step through that gateway into learning. And progression through all the levels of our courses is vital to our deliverable strategy. And the final element to mention on that is we've then also bid and successfully bid for funds to enable us to enhance the types of learning we do, particularly in a core sector for the for the region in health and social care. So we're going to be doing more work in terms of encouraging people to engage in health and social care, but using money through the Learning Skills Improvement Fund to again take that gateway approach, go out to people. Did you realise that health and social care is a much wider sector than just your perception? These are your types of opportunities, but also to utilise some really exciting uses of technology like virtual reality in order so that people can actually see what these opportunities are like and get that sort of buy-in. So we'll be using the Learning Skills Improvement Fund for that. And I'll pass back over to Angie now.
And then I thought you, oh yes, sorry. Out of the report, I thought you might be most interested if I comment on Isel. So that's on the bottom of page 45, going on to page 46. So Isel grew a lot over the last 18 months, but particularly the last 12 months. Our learner numbers went from, I think it was 181, that's right, to 301 as of the end of last year, and it's still growing. We have now a total, we had to put on 12 additional classes, so we now have 19 classes going on through the week, with a bigger teaching team that we had to recruit as we were going. And we tried to make sure that there is a class accessible for everybody that needs it. That's our key priority, rather than additional learning for other people to access, if you see what I mean. We need to make sure everybody has access. So that's been our core priority, if you like. We've also put on 3 migrant classes, because they're not officially funded by our funding from the Department for Education, the SFA. We had Homes for Ukraine funding, which helped put us at 3 classes. We work with volunteers and we coordinate that learning that goes on within those classes to make sure it's delivering on the English development to when they're ready for funding, they can then access the wider class offer. That's completely out of our control how the funding works. We have a list of categories that we're allowed to fund, and that's that. We have a core base here, and we have a core base of classes that happen at the Citadel, and we're just expanding that now into their 4th and final room, and we're taking on an additional tutor to just be ready for any extra work that is coming our way. We have had Ukrainians, Syrians, Hong Kong nationals and Afghans particularly coming to our offer with different funding streams that have come with them as well, which have enabled different parts of offer to be activated with them. And I think for me, that's probably it. And you may want to ask me questions.
Just following on from that, when somebody's been told that they've got to move, which I know can happen at very short notice, are you able to signpost them to to somebody who would be doing similar work in whichever area they're sent to?
Yes, yes, we do. As much as we can. Sometimes if it's like over a holiday or something like that, we might not see them. We might just get told by others that that has happened during that period, because it can happen quite quickly.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your report. I just wanted to take you back to page 28 and the series of bullet points that are around the subcontracted SEN provision. And I sort of get the sense of some quite careful wording in some of this. And I just wanted to kind of understand really the last 3 bullet points. So it seems to me that essentially you've had some couple of providers that have not quite delivered as you expected them to do. You've checked that your procurement's all fine and that's fine. You've got an action plan in place with those providers. I think I'm reading it correctly that the you had sought additional funding to expand the offer, but that you're going to consolidate at that higher level of 104 places, but not seek any further expansion at this stage, but possibly would be doing once everything's kind of as you want it to be. But the bit I kind of wanted to just understand properly, just in that the first of those 3 paragraphs, so the poor achievement rates relating to English and maths, is it that the rates are poor compared to what you would expect that cohort should be reaching, or is it that there's actually a unrealistic expectation on that particular cohort? And I suppose my guess is that this is, but correct me if I'm wrong here, that this is some provision that is possibly linked to other things, but that they have to have the English and maths as part of that. Am I reading it correctly? Or I appreciate I've sort of chucked a bunch of stuff there, but I'm just trying to sort of get underneath a little bit of what's going on there, I suppose.
Please pick me up on anything I don't answer. The English and maths, obviously, if they are able to do English and maths, or English or maths, they should be. And if the DFE will take funding back from us if we don't do English and maths with them. However, we did have, I think we had nearly 40,000 clawed back last year for not doing English and maths with some of those learners, because they would not have been able to achieve those English and maths qualifications. But there's two providers particularly who their English and or maths achievement rates are not where we would want them to be compared to our other providers who have similar challenges and learners. So we tend to go from that as a sort of benchmark, if you like, and then we look at national figures as well. But there's also a strong offer in North Yorkshire that we can look at as a comparison. So for that, we do look at it in respect of those learners, but at the same time, it is happening across the city, similar challenges, similar delivery, and others are managing to do it better than others. So we feel that they should be on an action plan. One has been on one for a little while now, but we've ramped that up even more because we would like to see, we've actually been involved in the recruitment of the next tutors within those two providers, because we felt that strongly that the tutors were not as qualified as we would have liked them to be, or as experienced maybe as we would have liked them to be, to get the right achievements. So we've been involved with that, been working really closely with them, and we will continue to monitor that as part of our ongoing quality processes. So they get a visit every month, and we go through those systems that they're part of the SAR, they're part of everything else that we do. And we do provide really good support to them to help them do those improvements as well. So we work really, really hard with them. There was another question in there, wasn't there? And I can't think what it was now.
Well, I think you've kind of summarised most of what I was trying to get at, and I suppose the sort of tangential part to it really was, this is post-16 provision, isn't it? And what I would hate to be seeing happening would be English and maths being a barrier to somebody being able to access other support or learning that they want to get to. And obviously English and maths are important, but if that becomes the barrier that, and I appreciate that you're working within a framework that says that they have to have the English and maths. So it was just trying to understand really, which I think you have sort of articulated really, that achievement isn't where it would be expected for that cohort, but with all of those other kind of caveats around it about that cohort and what might be realistic to expect. Would that be the right way of
Absolutely right. So yes, it is. We do encourage it where it is, where we feel that they are able to achieve it, but it is not used as a barrier in any way. And we wouldn't let, first, it's a personalized learning plan, what interests them, what's going to engage with them to get them to come every day and develop themselves. That's the key, particularly with any cohort really at that young age. We have a 16 to 19 study program as well, that they're young people, vulnerable adults, would be neat if they weren't in study, and it's the same process really. They do have to do English and maths, but ultimately they need it to be able to get into employment, so it's really important. Okay.
Thank you. Just on that, in particular, the thing that struck me on that particular area about special educational needs, particularly around the higher needs support students, was whether or not you are joined up with other pathways that might not be a study pathway, but might be somewhere like Yorkcraft or somewhere where someone with higher level needs, special educational needs, who might not be able to do the English or maths courses that you're talking about, but they might be able to turn up every day and be in employment in a supported environment where there is that kind of level of support. They might also be able to do some learning around that employment if they're not working full time. And also related to that, just I had a more general point just around the joined upness of those educational pathways with the other things around digital skills, for example, and just how those referral routes work between the kind of education pathways, for want of a better word, and the other skills that people might also need, either because they're accessing one of your other courses, or within the local authority, actually, if there are areas of local authority activity where, you know, like parking, for example, or other adult services, or maybe children's services, where actually those digital skills are then a barrier to them accessing other council services, just how your referral routes work between those different bits. Sorry, there was a lot in there.
The special educational needs programs, actually, that quite a few of the providers are leading the way with some of the digital stuff that they're doing. They're doing VR. They're doing all sorts of digital stuff with University of Leeds, with some of the learners. We've had a lot go into internships from there into employment pathways as well, quite a high number, actually. So that's really good. And a lot of employment pathways are key and are expected to be seen in every learner's plan is an employment pathway, to whether that's vocationally or academically. So one of our providers will be fixing bikes with them, and another provider does forestry skills, and another provider does stuff around creative arts, if you like, and selling your artwork or the creative pieces that you've created. So there's a lot of different work that goes on across the different providers. Some are like United Response, might be cafe training, and Choose to Youth do quite a bit of catering training as well, but also other pathways within that. Does that help? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm subbing on this, so apologise if this is a bit of an obtuse question. From the employers ask, is there any sort of general themes that come out?
The LSIP identified actually each sector has specific needs. So, but there were a lot of generic transferable skills that were identified, which is actually why our time is now, if you like, in terms of getting people into that gateway and into progressing. Lots of employers are articulating that the skills that they're looking are basic communication skills. They're looking for individuals who are able to turn up on time and do all of those type of things. But those people who are able to problem solve, work in a team, be resilient to challenge, all of those type of things were keenly identified within the LSIP as areas for development. In many ways, it's employers say, get me the right people, and then we can provide them with the specific skills that they need. Then at the higher end, there was then those very technical and very specific skills, which are outside of the reach of adult education budget, but are level 5, level 6, level 7 degree level, higher level skills in project management, higher level digital skills, and those type of things. But it's down to the basics, and it was surprising just how strongly those employer feedback was on those basic, wider transferable skills.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask about, it's really great, by the way, to see all the fabulous cultural stuff that's going on in here. I was wondering about how you kind of go out and recruit for all of the kind of, so looking at, I suppose there's two sides to it. Looking at apprenticeships, how do you support adults with apprenticeships is one side of it, because obviously lots of employers are not always keen to take adult apprentices because of minimum wage things, or at least I've come across that in the past, compared to kind of 16, 17, 18-year-olds where they can pay them lower apprentice wages. So I'd be interested to know if there's kind of tensions around that and how we support adults into apprenticeships. And equally, my a lot of the residents in the area of the city where I live are adults who perhaps really would benefit from accessing your other kind of, you know, the digital skills, the kind of building those work-based skills, those kind of courses that you've obviously, you know, the digital boot camps sound great, the introduction to coding, your things around businesses and being self-employed, all of that kind of support into work stuff. How do we get that out there to reach the people who are the hardest to reach in the sort of areas of the city like where I live?
I'll deal with apprenticeships first. So we work with quite a wide range of employers, and who often do employ adult apprentices quite often. So within childcare and adult care particularly, they are very supportive, but adults come with additional life challenges, don't they? They have more barriers, they have life to organise and so on. So we've had 2 of our assessors have trained to be mental health first aiders as well, because through COVID, particularly within the adult care industry, there was a lot of issues that came up around that, and we needed to do additional support for those learners. And we've had to encourage them to take breaks from the learning and to get certain things in place again before they restart their learning. So there's quite a lot of support there. We've got financial support, we've got childcare support if need be, as well as the assessors will do regular calls with them and check in with them, and there's an online portfolio they can contact, and there's all sorts of contact ways that they can get in touch with us as well. And the employers are very much part of that process as well. So we try to work with both sides and to keep everybody engaged. So we're most of our apprentices probably are adult apprentices, and that's because we work with a lot of small businesses rather than large businesses. Regarding, what was the second part again? It was digital skills within areas, wasn't it? The ground.
About kind of more generally, the hardest to reach people in the city, how do we reach them? How we reach them with the offer. I do know that your family learning people are at the hubs quite regularly and are fabulous.
Yeah, so we're part of 100% digital as well. So we've got a pick and mix, if you like, of like 7 courses, which could just be about looking at how to access your NHS app to how to do something online. So there's not just the employment side, there is the more generic stuff that a resident may want rather than for their life skills rather than their work skills. So we've got a range of offer that covers that side of things as well. We work with a lot of charities. So we work with Kira, I'm trying to think of what they're called now. I want to say Choose To, and it's Changing Lives, that's it. CVS and all of those. So we work with a lot of charities, and we'll put courses on specifically at their venue if they want us to, or we just promote the offer that's available near to them. But quite often we like to work with them directly. They help recruit those learners because they have the relationship with them, and they're more likely to get them to attend in reality, and then we build the courses up with them. So we've had specific courses with My Site, for example, around how to access digital equipment with very poor sight, what is useful there, and so on. So we've been doing that recently. Same with, we were working at Travellers Trust earlier this year, or maybe at the end of last year. And we actually worked with IT Reuse and Travellers Trust. We delivered IT courses, and we gave them a free laptop at the end, which was recycled, or phones or tablet, depending on what it was they needed access to make sure that they could then use that going forward.
Can I follow on?
Yeah, please do.
Linked directly to the strategy that we talked about. Our strategy talks about developing transferable skills through all of our learning. So we look at putting courses on or taking learning to where people are, those examples that Angie's just pointed out. And regardless of what the topic area is, we will develop people's skills in digital, in wider transferable skills, in maths, in English throughout the programme, and reiterate what those transferable skills are. Because certainly in terms of improving people's life chances, often they will be education phobic, they will have had a poor experience at school, they are terrified of those horrible words like passing qualifications and doing maths and doing English. So our offer celebrates those skills that people have got and allows them to be able to point themselves towards opportunities that are then created by understanding those skills and demonstrating. You know, a large number of people are, you know, very able to use numbers. They might not have a piece of paper that says I can do maths. However, they're managing bills under some of the most challenging circumstances and don't give themselves enough credit. So quite a lot of what our offer does is celebrates those things that they've already got. It's a little bit Wizard of Oz at times, you know, Scarecrow had a brain all along. We didn't believe it till he got a certificate. It's very much that approach that we try and celebrate as much as possible. But we are increasing the use of resources, so that Learning Skills Improvement Fund money for digital, as an example, will allow us to do more about that digital upskill engagement out in the community than we're currently doing as well.
So I just wanted to follow on to that. Do you have say target areas in the city or target demographics which you have KPIs against, or maybe not KPIs, but do you have kind of strategic people or areas that you are trying to target with?
Yes, so part of that's connected with the Explore libraries as well. So we're in those key areas where we need to be. So Clifton, Explore, for example, Acomb. We're also at York High School. We're going to be delivering some work within the Westfield Centre coming up. We do it wherever we can, but sometimes just being in a venue isn't enough that's local. It's actually working with the people on the ground who are used to those relationships with them, who actually help us put on the courses, is actually what's making it work and helping us to reach them more than anything else. Because nowadays marketing itself is quite challenging and to reach them. So working with food banks, we have someone who goes out to the food banks and chats to people there. We work with Tang Hall Community Centre. We'll work with loads of different groups, not just for family learning, but for all those connections you can make on the side and then build on that from that. So engagement, as Paul said earlier, is key to what we do, really. It is key, isn't it?
Thanks, Chair. Just a different question, just about job fairs, and there's a couple of references in the annex on, I think it's page 36 and page 45, and I noticed that you're kind of looking at what works and, you know, different size ones and that sort of thing. But aside from sort of numbers of people through the door and numbers of exhibitors, do you then sort of do follow up with the employers and the people who visit to kind of see how it translates? Because I could sort of see that a big fair could be great and everybody fills all their places, or actually a smaller fair with a bit more time could actually make it, you know, better in terms of the number of people who actually then get employment from it. I think that's obviously what we're aiming for, isn't it? So
we do an employer survey and we do a learner survey as well. So we get comments from from participants, visitors, after when they're leaving the events and when they arrive, as much as we can. And we also do a survey from the employers that have been at the event as to what have they got from it. And that the key thing from a job fair is the opportunity to have a one-to-one conversation with them. So one of the things we did in the last job fair was to give all visitors a little card that they could get stamps when they had a conversation. And if they got 6 stamps, they could get a free coffee. And the employers were really like that, because they said it sort of forced some of those who are more nervous to have a conversation. Certainly in Acomb, a small job fair works really well, but we've struggled to make it work elsewhere. We've just not had the attendance as much. And the more you drop it down, the less employers you've got who are coming to the events, because they're not going to come to a big one as well as a small one, and they're only going to come out once or twice a year, and it becomes increasingly problematic to work out. So when I talked to the job fair about it recently, to the job centre, sorry, we were talking about maybe employability fairs might be a bit more appropriate. So you can still have some employers there, but maybe more around those transferable skills that are going to help you write that CV writing, interview skills, and sort of maybe in some of the other areas doing something like that, because a job fair itself works really well in Acomb, but elsewhere we've not been able to get the right venue or the right people involved in it to make it a success, and that's where we've struggled. So that's why we thought maybe the employability fairs
Any more?
I've got a couple. Paul, you said you do what you're not allowed to do, which is great. What is it that you're doing that you're not allowed to do? What shouldn't you be doing?
We stretch our boundaries as far as we can, basically. You know, we are funded that the ultimate direction of travel from our funding policy is to get people into better work life opportunities. And there is a constant battle, particularly around where do you start with those individuals, and this understanding that for some people, the first step to getting a job is coming out of the house or coming out to mix with other people. And there is a constant tension with funding bodies, with inspectorates, with a variety of people to get that message across, that if without that vital work we do on health and well-being, which is aligned within our funding, but is often forgotten about, that if we didn't do that, people wouldn't be able to get to those next steps in terms of being accessible. So that's probably the area where at times we need to strengthen that progression opportunity. And we've done an awful lot of work on tying those progression pathways together, enabling people to understand that there is a pathway from it, so that we can demonstrate that intervention at that starting point there will allow people to progress right through. So that's probably the closest answer to that.
Cool. And just pick on something that Angela said, relationships, you're right. Advertise, you've got to talk to people. That's all it boils down to. Easiest way of doing it. So thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Well, Jenny,
Hi.
I really enjoyed reading so far.
Yeah, it's been lovely, hasn't it? I'll just introduce myself because there's a few people around the table that I don't know. So I'm the client and relationship manager between the council and Explore. I'm not going to introduce the report. I'm just going to hand you over to Jenny, but I'd like you to welcome Jenny Layfield, who is the Chief Executive of Explore. Thank
you, Andy. So yes, I'm Jenny Layfield. I started at Explore in January. My background is not libraries and archives, so I come from a cultural and heritage background. So I'm working on the basis you'll have all read the excellent report I put forward for you. But speaking to Councillor Nichols late last week, I thought you might find it interesting to get some of my reflections on my first 10 months in post. And I suppose some of my perspectives from someone out of the libraries and archives world in terms of Explore and how Explore works. So I think for me, I've been really surprised. I've been really surprised coming into Explore in terms of the breadth of the work that Explore do, and in terms of the range and way that they supposed to touch their community's life. So for those of you that know Explore incredibly well and inside out and back to front, I apologise. However, I'm going to use this opportunity to sort of really introduce you to what we do. So Explore is a community benefit society. So we are owned 2/3 by our community members and 1/3 by our staff. We are set up to be of benefit to our community. So to advance education, culture, arts and heritage, and to provide facilities for the communities of York in the interest of social welfare and improving the condition of their life. 2/3 of our income is through our contract with yourselves, and 1/3 we generate through commercial enterprises such as our 7 reading cafes, room hire and fundraising. And I'll come back to that a little bit more later. So when I look at the library world, so my background is culture and heritage. I come from visitor attractions. We are very, very KPI driven. One of the things that I've been absolutely astounded by is actually the level of visits we have. So last year, 725,000 visits to the libraries alone, and then additional to the reading cafes. So we deliver joy of reading. You would expect that from libraries, but 66,000 physical issues, that's 66,000 books going out free to communities within York, and 397,768 e-issues. So that sense of the communities of York having access to those books. We have 41,444 members,
And then we deliver events, things like the Big City Read last year, which was about adult literacy and getting people to engage in reading. And then the Big City Read, which those of you who have children will know about in terms of working with schools so that children come into the libraries over the summer and have access to books, and there is something to spur them to keep their learning on going through. We're a trusted information provider. So we have partnerships with a whole range of community partners across York, Health Watch, the Education Development Trust. We provide access to IT, so that sense of digital inclusion. So 41,866 sessions of IT were booked. Now that figure is dropping, but for those that haven't got access, this is an absolutely vital place for them to be able to access IT and to be able to understand what they can do with it. We do learn and imagine and create. So I've talked in the report about the fact that we were successful in becoming a national portfolio organisation with Arts Council England. So this sense of us in delivering creativity. So 2,571 events. So that is events that are delivered for the residents of York, of which over nearly 40,000 people attended. So again, people coming in and accessing cultural experiences within their libraries. And that's a huge range. So working with Next Door But One, who are a fantastic community-based theatre organisation delivering small-based theatre productions in library. So the one that I saw was Operation Hummingbird, which is a beautiful small story about bereavement, but delivered in these really intimate surroundings, and then the audience afterwards being able to share their experiences of bereavement and feel that they've got a shared community. Right through to the other extent of Acomb had the English touring opera come and provide the Wish Gatherer. So you've got an audience in Acomb hearing these amazing voices booming around their library. And because it is their safe space, there was a child there of 9 on his own. His dad dropped him off. His dad wasn't interested. He had a bit of a break. And this child's face during this performance, that will have done something for him in his life in relation to having access to that and having access to that in Acomb. We also have the archives. So the archives, we look after the City of York Council's archives. So we have 500 cubic metres of archives. That's how we measure archives, don't ask me why. But to give you a sense of that, that is 20 shipping containers full of archive material that we look after on your behalf. And those collections range from 1155 right through to the present day. So this collection is recognised internationally for having one of the most outstanding collections and intact collections of the civic records in the UK. So we have records of the proceedings of this council from 1476 right through to the present day. Now that puts us probably the only other collection that would have anywhere near that would be London and what it can deliver for the City of York. And all of that is currently looked after by just 4 members of staff. So I suppose coming in for me, my excitement is the model, the innovative thing that you as a council have done in thinking about creating this model and a way for libraries and archives to be sustainable in the long term. And, you know, I've heard today from various things, you know, the challenges that you're facing. And it's the model that really excites me in terms of me coming in and having that opportunity to look at what libraries and archives can do for this city, but also look at how we can become more and more sustaining and how we can do that. Because of our model, that sense of the voice that we can give to communities, how we can liaise with our community members, how we can work with our community members to really get them to feel it's their library service and their archives and how they can build that support in relation to it. So that really excites me. So I thought what I'd try and give you is some of the opportunities I see and some of the challenges that I see in terms of coming up. So I'm at the moment working through our next sort of 5-year strategic period and what those sort of key things we're going to do are. So in terms of opportunities, culture and creativity sits there for me. So libraries as bridges to wider cultural access. So people who might never have thought to go and see English touring opera, someone came to Acomb and some 9-year-old lad has had his life changed by going to that. And that was absolutely seen by Arts Council. So we've received £660,000 over a 3-year period to deliver that. And that is absolutely about our role in York, working with the other cultural partners, but to give cultural access to those wider communities. So how do people take that first step into culture? How do we facilitate that and bring that forward? So that English touring opera is the classic example for me, and it's working with those partners in York and the meetings that I've been have that I want us to be able to say to York Museum Trust, absolutely come here, talk about great Viking things or whatever else it is, but bring it out to those communities so they can see it. So culture and creativity feels hugely important for us. Also, I think health and wellbeing sits there. So I've had a number of meetings recently with the Humber and York ICB, with Nimbus, with Sian at Healthwatch, with Alison at the NCBO. So what is our role in the health and wellbeing agenda? And again, that is that bit about we are safe, accessible spaces. People come to us because they feel safe. If you're terrified about having your blood pressure taken and the moment you go into a doctor's, your blood pressure shoots through the roof, well, how can we support? Because actually you come to us and you feel quite comfortable. How can we start to be that bridge in relation to health and wellbeing? And I've had some fantastic conversations, really exciting conversation about the things that we can do around health and wellbeing. And then I come back to our archives. They are an undersung treasure. So I've heard sort of the initial stages and seen the draft of the tourism strategy. So how can this resource play into that and attract so many different audiences? So both international, national, as well as local residents in terms of those archives. And our Arts Council programme is all about local access to the archives and getting people to understand them. But the opportunities for us, both in terms of giving people access, also when we think about our sustainability in relation to how we use those archives, is incredibly important. And again, great conversations with the Minster, with the Borthwick, with York Museum Trust around how that might develop over time. We're doing some really exciting work at the moment with Bright White, who are one of the digital partners, about how we can use digital to bring the archive to life and tell different stories from it. So some really great innovative stuff there. In terms of challenges, audience, I think, is one of them. And I get told off, it's a different term. So I come from one word when it's audience, and then is it members or are we talking about visitors? So whichever term you want to use, but those people that come through the door. So we collect an outstanding amount of data in relation to who comes through the door and what events they come to. However, I think there's more that we can do. The world that I come from is a lot more granular in terms of that. And that, I suppose, is understanding who does come through our doors, but also who doesn't. And once we know who doesn't, what can we do to address that? How can we start to open those conversations? But it's also not about creating barriers, but opening up. So I know there are regulars who are homeless people within York that come to the city centre. One particular gentleman, he comes, particularly in the winter, he'll arrive the moment the doors open, he goes up onto our veranda bit, he sits there with a book and he doesn't leave until the day finishes. That's his place. And knowing, the more we know about those kind of people as well, the more we can do, the more we can be targeted around it. And there are all sorts of innovations out there in terms of audiences that I think we can think about in terms of that. And then I have to say finance, don't I? So I suppose that's just about acknowledging the world that we're all facing at the moment and hear that from you. So the impact of inflationary costs have not only affected the residents we support and us being warm spaces, but have affected us. So our heat and light bill went up 111% last financial year and a further 25% on top of that for this financial year. That has a huge impact in relation to what we're doing. The margins in our cafe become increasingly difficult because we try to peg our prices at a level which feels accessible to our communities. So we vary our pricing across that. But again, those margins become incredibly difficult to do. So the contract payment that you give us is absolutely vital in supporting us and deliver what we do. But I know and I see the challenges that you're facing too. But I suppose the point I just wanted to be very clear about is we have a part to play in this. The 2/3 and a third absolutely sits in my head as a clarion call in terms of my responsibilities for Explore and what I do with that. But the money that you provide us and that contractual relationship are also helpful to us in terms of keeping that sustainability going. So when we talk to our auditors, we are a going concern. We are a going concern because of that contract with yourselves. When we spoke with Arts Council to get further funding in, one of the things that gives them reassurance is the fact that we have that contract with yourselves and it is there for 15 years and that payment is absolutely clear. When we're talking to our suppliers, so that we don't have to constantly pay them back. The fact that we have that contract with you and the fact that you have that regular payment is the reason that we can get those things so that we can build. But my absolute responsibility when I'm looking over that next 5 years for us is about how we look at that sustainability, where we step in that. I've just spent the last week on a fundraising course, which was the most amazing course I've ever been on in my life. But thinking about what we need to do and our part in this and how we work with our community partners in terms of doing that. Part of that is raising our profile, and it's also having that conversation and working with you in terms of how we have that conversation with broader partners about our needs. So I'm happy to answer any questions, anything that you've asked for. I've also dropped off a copy of last year's annual review. So there's a copy there for all of you, which tells you more in a very glossy, pretty version about the things we do. Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Ely and Councillor Lincoln. Sorry, Councillor Clark.
No problem.
Clark here.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report, and yeah, congratulations on the MPO status as well. Great stuff that's coming out of York Explore. I mean, there's a couple of things that I just wanted to mention, and just sort of get your view on really. I mean, you're doing quite a lot of work with digital inclusion and whatnot, and there's increasing kind of digitization of the collections and things like that. I'm just wondering how you are taking people with you with the sort of, with that digital inclusion, and you're not excluding people, because I noticed in one of your report, in part of your report, some of what is said is about bringing back printed materials and things like that, and I'm wondering whether that's prompts from people that don't have you know, are not au fait with digitization, or they don't have digital access. So that's my first question. And then the second one is, I mean, it's a huge increase on your heating and lighting, you know, 111%. I think it was, you know, from, what was it, 68,000 to 206,000 or something like that. I'm just wondering, you mentioned environmental sustainability. I'm just wondering, you know, what the plans are to make yourselves a bit more environmentally sustainable, because it's not mentioned too much in the report. Thank you.
I suppose the digital side of things is us always being very aware that we are an inclusive organisation, so we're always going to need to take that balance. So I spoke at the York Old Persons Association and had a very sort of clear sense from them about how we sort of, you know, that for them the printed material is still really important, and then how we retain that balance. So I think it's always thinking about accessibility in terms of what we do and finding that balance. So with the archives, digitisation is actually essential for access. Some of the things that help you imagine, something from 1145 is incredibly delicate. If we digitise it, then we can make it more available. And then the benefit of that in terms of access is if on the right tablet, you can expand things so people can read it more, you can reduce it, so that there is that sense of it. It's retaining the balance and understanding what we're doing. So we are seeing the number of physical issues of books reducing, but what we're seeing is the number of e-issues going up. So it's finding that balance. And when I talk about information in terms of audiences, part of the work we need to do is that segmentation about who are our audiences and what are their different needs, and making sure we deliver to them. We are absolutely about that broad community benefit. So we're always going to have to find that balance in relation to the access, and then starting to think about and how do we help support our communities in terms of, actually digital might feel a bit scary, but actually if you have, you know, sight issues, that actually reading on a tablet makes it more accessible for you, because you can change the fonts, you can change the color contrasts, and then us thinking through and working with partners like Your Learning in terms of, okay, what we need to put in place to make people be able to access. So that's the digital side. In terms of the heat of lighting, so we are at the moment going through environmental audits for all of our libraries. So we're working both with York University, with students coming in and doing some work around it, but also as part of it, as an Arts Council organisation, there are various tools that are available to us to look through it. There are challenges. One of my previous lives, I worked for the National Trust for 15 years. So the city centre, 18th century building, that's going to be a challenge that none of us are ever going to have a checkbook big enough to handle. But when you look at some of the smaller gateway libraries, there are more opportunities there. So we are looking through it. So somewhere like Aiken is already on biomass. We need to just work through that. So it's challenging. The age of our buildings is difficult, but it's looking at it and working through it. Some of them, the city centre is amazing. I know, speaking to the National Trust, trying to make those environmentally sustainability is going to be a big ask.
Thank you. Couple of things. One thing that just sort of popped into my mind, which might be totally ridiculous. Have you thought about approaching any of the tech companies to digitize the archives, given the fact they're all trying to build out their AI models? And I would guess there isn't a huge amount of historical data around. You might be able to get it digitized and they might pay something. That's the first question. Second question, any plans to bring back newspapers? Because certainly my attendance with my children at the libraries and my consumption of bacon sandwiches and tea has dropped considerably since you stopped doing newspapers. I had a third one, but I can't remember what it was. There you go. Oh, by the way, I substitute on this committee, so I can ask a slightly wackier question.
So the tech companies, yes. So part of that partnership with Bright White has been about looking at digitising it and how we use it. Could we do more? Absolutely, yes. So part of my coming in to this role is about building up those relationships with different organisations throughout York and looking at where there can be that sort of mutual benefit. We also work with Find My Past. So there are arrangements that we've got with Find My Past who will then digitise some elements of the archives, which then makes them accessible. So there are various partnerships in place in relation to how doing it, how you go about digitising an archive, and I don't know all the technical bits about it. You have to be very, very careful. So it's just finding that balance in relation to it. So yes, we've got some of it in place, some more of it we need to look at in terms of what partners are out there and how we can work with them. In terms of newspapers,
I guess that's come up before. I'm guessing.
it has come up a number of times. I am always managing a difficult and tight budget. So when we went through COVID removed newspapers generally across the board for obvious reasons. When we've come back, we've looked at provision and what we're doing, and we made decisions not to on that particular thing in terms of looking at budgets and what we were going to do. And we're currently looking at funding opportunities for certainly over the winter when people are wanting to come and use us as warm spaces, whether we can find funding to bring them in, even if it's just for the winter period. So there are those opportunities in relation to doing it. And I'm really, really sorry that you haven't got your newspapers.
It was heart-rendering, if I'm honest. It was difficult.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, congratulations on your appointment, Jenny. And to declare a semi-personal interest, I'm a member of Axby and Wigginton Explore Friends, and thank you to the Explore generally, but to Andy in particular for the work on converting the former premises of Oaken Grove into a spanking new first-rate library, and with much wider community use in the building than it had before as well. So really good to know that. My question's about a mundane topic of PC usage. And there's probably a very straightforward one-sentence explanation for this. But it's this comment on page 57 at the bottom end of overall performance grouping, where you say there is a continued downward trend in PC usage with 41,866 sessions this year. First of all, is there an explanation for this? I would guess there may very well be. Secondly, how's it going year on year? So how much is this reduced from last year? Is that trend linear, or is it an increasing deceleration of usage?
So I probably can't be dreadfully scientific about it. I can talk to you about our assumptions in terms of what we're seeing. People have got more of their own devices, so there are more people with their own devices, whether it's smartphone, tablets, so they do still come into us, but they're using the free Wi-Fi and they're using the community space rather than actually logging onto hard-based PCs. So that's the main thing we're seeing, and we are seeing the same trend. I think the risk, and always the risk with KPIs, if you go, oh, there's a downward trend, is there will always be a base level of people who need it there. That will shift in terms of what people have access to, but making sure there is still that sort of availability there becomes really important. But our assumption and looking at people coming in is they're coming in, they're finding a space, they're sitting on their phone or they're bringing their laptops in, and it's a smaller proportion that are wanting to come in and actually log on and use a PC.
Thank you. That was exactly what I thought might be the situation, but it's nice to have it confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the discussion, Jenny. I think you're just picking up on the point of access and ensuring that people are coming from across the communities to you. And I know we've had a conversation about this before, but I really do want to understand more about what engagement you're doing. The libraries are very popular across the piece, and so there are many people who are familiar with that as somewhere to go, and it's very welcoming, and there's a variety of things to do, but it's understanding how you'll look at drawing more people in, bearing in mind that some of the activities that are put on aren't free, so there's that potential barrier to access, and in terms of numbers of libraries, are you planning to keep them the same? Thanks.
So I think the access bit comes back to my thing about data and understanding. So we do a lot in terms of engagement. So we do a lot around social media, on Twitter and Facebook. Our libraries, and you'll know Councillor Waller because you come in, they do, our library managers, do a lot in terms of working within their communities, getting to know their communities. And certainly one of the expectations of me coming into my post has been about that external advocacy. So going out and talking to partners and looking at where those opportunities are that we can access different audiences, or we can open up different opportunities. So I think there are lots of different things that we're doing there. So at the moment we're looking at, we will be part of a pilot for the family hubs. That again is another way to offer people an opportunity that they might not have necessarily come across us, but they might come there, and then how do we do that? I think the more we understand about our audience, and that bit about, I'm always passionate about data, so I always need a very good data person because I just see lots of numbers, but if you have a good data person who can then talk you through, then we can start to see which are the audiences not coming in and how is the best way to communicate with them. And then we can start to develop from there. So we've already talked about the Westfield project. There are some really interesting discussions sort of at the outset of that in relation to people from Chapel Fields will feel that Front Street is 1,000,000 miles away from them. So we need to think about how we work with the Westfield Centre in terms of, first of all, going to them. So, how do libraries go out? How do we go on tour to places where people are, and then make them feel more comfortable about coming through? And that's the work that we're doing in terms of building those relationships and those partnerships up, and then looking at different ways that we can come in. It's also being smarter about our partnerships. So, we have York Learning use a number of our rooms. How was that conversation in terms of people coming into York Learning or people that are in the library, and how do we have those conversations that they both talk through? So it's developing, I would say, but those are the kind of plans that we are doing in terms of thinking through audience development and audience engagement. In terms of number of libraries and whether we're considering closing any of them, no, we're not.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Nelson. Thank you, first of all, for your report, actually, because I think we sometimes get quite dry reports, and I think your enthusiasm sort of shone through the report and in the questions and answers that you're giving. I just wanted to sort of, initially I wanted to pick up on something that you touched on briefly, and then there's something that you've just said which I think sort of links in really. So I've been an observer to the board of the Theatre Royal for the last quite a few years, and I've also had various conversations with York Museum Trust at various times, and you've mentioned as well about, you know, how do we sort of get out into different communities, and how do you kind of take the offer to that community? And it has always seemed to me that Explore has that reach that those other organisations don't necessarily do. And I just wondered, first of all, I think you did say there was some sorts of conversations going on, but I kind of keep hearing bits of that there are conversations, but it never quite materializes. I just wondered, you know, what your thinking was around how Explore might support the aims of some of those other organizations in terms of, you know, expanding out into those communities. And then just around the data, and again, it's really interesting kind of hearing similar conversations about data and about audiences that we do or don't know about and that sort of thing. And again, this is possibly something for Councillor Coles to think about even as well, but I wonder whether there's an opportunity to share data within the different organizations. And obviously some of it will be commercially sensitive, I understand that, but you know, actually, if you have, say, an opera that comes to Acomb and absolutely blows the mind of a 9-year-old child, that's fantastic, but how do you then make sure that that child gets an opportunity to see some more, or more 9-year-old children get to have the mind blown in different ways? And is there a way that the data that you're all collecting could be combined to have a positive benefit for the whole city, I suppose?
Thank you. It's a great report, and you do an amazing service across the city. I only ever hear fabulous things. Can't wait to go to Clifton next week. I mean, it is, and the way you presented as well, I mean, I've written tons of things down while you've been talking, just about things that I need to follow up on. But the couple of things that struck me was, one, your point around health and well-being, and just how we join those things together, which I think is a really exciting option, which I'm definitely going to be picking up separately. And related to that, and it also relates to Councillor Crawshaw's point about access and how an audiences and things, we've talked about this previously, is I feel like there is a great audience of older people and children and families who use libraries, and there is a group of probably older young people who I think is a more challenging market, for want of a better word, in terms of an audience. And I just wonder about how you get those young people in, possibly also because of the need for a health and well-being offer, and that might be a place to deliver some of that in a safe space. That just pick that up from what you were saying then, and then just the wider cultural offer as well. I mean, you've got my brain buzzing, which is brilliant, but just getting you involved in the cultural offer for the city and making sure that you are looped into all the other creative talents and energies across the city, to ensure that when we've got, you know, a busking championship or whatever it might be next year, that actually some of that can take place in your library spaces, potentially, if that's what you would want. That's all great. And I completely agree about signposting and just ensuring that we are getting those parts of the council kind of joining together, and that everyone's kind of aware of what else is out there. But brilliant.
Oh, right, partnerships. So I think there is every willingness to work on them. So I've been in place 10 months. So we are, and Catherine from York Museum Trust has been in place a similar thing, and Paul has just started at theatre. I think great things happen when you got a load of new people who are still enthusiastic and start at the same time. Similarly with the national portfolio organisations, National Centre for Early Music, Next Door But One, we work really closely together. Because we are all incredibly busy delivering lots of exciting things, we have to have those conversations about where they overlap. And the Arts Council were really clear, and the reason that York got 2 more national portfolio organisations this year, when they'd originally said they weren't going to do anything more for York because York is seen as an affluent city, is because of who it was and that role of libraries within that of connecting and giving access to communities. So we have to do it. We also want to do it. It's finding the right opportunities and the right conversations, and those are things we're doing it. I think when cultural organisations talk about it a lot, they absolutely are going to do it. It just takes some time to find that right thing. We've got lots of really exciting stuff. So Next Door But One have done all sorts of exciting stuff. So as well as the performances, we did workshops for young teenage girls on empowerment and how they were going to look at that. It was a course over summer holidays, which was absolutely brilliant. So I think at the moment, what I'd say is we are working on it. It just might take a bit of time for us, all of us, with, you know, getting to grips with new big jobs and then looking at where those opportunities are, but we're absolutely committed to do it. The data sharing is also part of that. So because of those of us at national portfolio organisations, we all have to submit data in certain formats. So there is work that we can do within that. We all collect it in different ways through different systems. So we did look initially at whether we could do some kind of joint data role. That might take a while, but we are certainly sharing when we're sitting talking about it. We are doing bits where if Next Door But One come and do a performance at ours, then they're collecting data, but they're sharing that data with us in terms of who comes. So it's early days, but I think that commitment is absolutely there. And you know, I've had conversations with different people about, okay, how do we collect it? How can we share it? How can we start to build it around? So I think it's there. I'm going to come back to the old people and young people and families, because I haven't worked in an organisation yet. So when I was in the National Trust, it had the same thing. When I was at the National Coal Mining Museum, it had the same thing. And you can see it, you'll see it through your own patterns. So you're a young parent with young children, you're desperate to get out of the house and get them occupied. You join the National Trust, you go to your library, you do all of those activities. They hit that beautiful stage at 13 where the last thing you can do them is get out of the house. They don't want to go with you, and they don't want to go anywhere on their own that feels dumb. So every single organisation drops off at that point, and then they come back either as parents because they've got young children and they're going through that cycle again, or older people when they're doing that. So I don't think it's just us. I think it's something that sector's doing. I think we can think about it. So I was at Burnholme yesterday. They're having some challenges at the moment with groups of teenagers coming in the later hours of our opening and being very energetic in relation to how they are in the library. I think that has 2 challenges for us. I worry about my staff and the impact it's having on them, but I also think there is a skill set that we don't necessarily have. But how do you start to have a conversation with that group of teenagers about, you've come here, it's obviously a place you can come, you've chosen to come here because you can come here, it's inside. How do we take that energy and use it? I don't have the answer yet. I want to find out ways that we can do it, because if you look at some of the things that are going on, it feels really important to do it. But I think every single cultural organisation would say that it's a gap. But for all of us that have children, we'll know exactly why there's that gap.
Thank you. I don't think this is not an interest, but it's probably worth declaring that I also happen to work in an NPO in the heritage sector, so different sector, but it means that I really know how hard the work is to get that NPO status, and I think it's absolutely fantastic that the libraries have achieved that this year. And I think it's a real statement of the wider cultural role that the libraries play in our city. What I was wondering about is, it's sort of struck me from your report. I mean, we all know that Joe's absolutely right, Councillor Cole's absolutely right. No one has ever said anything bad about any of the libraries. Everyone loves them there, and they're absolutely fantastic. It strikes me that doesn't look like there's a schools programme or sort of some of that more structured stuff. And I suppose in a wider sense for the city, this is something that concerns me because we have so many cultural organisations that don't seem to have structured schools programmes. And actually what you've just spoken about there in terms of youths and there being a gap, this kind of fits into that. So I was just wondering if you could sort of speak about how you work with the schools in the city, and also whether there would be, that would be something that you might be looking at in the future, something more set in terms of learning. Thank you.
So we do work with schools. So the Summer Reading Challenge is absolutely a partnership between us and primary schools, and a very healthy level of competition about which school is going to take the cup. I'm not sure how healthy some of it was, but absolutely that relationship. So we have a service developer who's all about children's and families, and she has great relationships with those primary schools in relation to that Summer Reading Challenge and building activities on that, and has been very successful at getting funding to work with those that maybe find it more difficult. So schools in Derwent, Thorpe and areas like that. So she has been incredibly good at doing that. So at that level, we do well and have good. I've seen we have our reading and learning advisors going out to schools and doing assemblies there at that level, and you can hear them when they come in. So I was at Burnholme on Monday when we had a school come in and being shown around and talked. So at the primary school level, we've got really good, strong relationships, and we're constantly building on those. More challenging at high school, but I think that's because I'm sure high school teachers would tell you the sheer volume of things that they're trying to do in relation to it becomes harder. So it's harder for us and harder for them in to do it. That doesn't mean to say that as we look at different people that we want to do, that might not become something that we look at, but at the moment that focuses on that, trying to ground a bit about how do you start to sow the seeds. I've listened to enough Radio 4 podcasts, that you hear those people who have, started off going into libraries when I was a child, and those books, and that's the bit where we're trying to really get in, and then we can look to build on it. But there are also other organisations in York who are doing that work. So Reach, who are the local education partnership, are absolutely, it's the cultural organisations working together to look at education programmes. We are really clear, libraries about the joy of reading. This is away from Biff and Chip and Oh Floppy, No Floppy, and all of those great literary things, and more towards just sheer love of reading, just that sheer opening up of the imagination and what it can do. Reach are really thinking about and have now got champions from all sorts of different cultural organisations teed up with different schools in York, and are absolutely doing that work. So we are part of Reach, but we know that that's the organisation who has the skills and the talent and the people in place to absolutely look at those programmes, and they're doing that incredibly well.
That's great.
Can I just add something to that? I think also the Haxby Library, with a co-location vision with Oak and Grove, they run a lot of youth provision, specifically as a charity. So there's an opportunity there to develop that relationship, getting young people coming in after the library's closed, actually, to do their youth provision. But there's probably some learning and working with them in partnership.
Also in relation to the archive side of things, and sort of the potential for more formal stuff around the archives and collections specifically, just might be worth, or would that be something that could be considered, or resources and things, making that archive accessible for the schools that are teaching local history and things like that?
There is some of that. So the archive, you've got that gap. So again, then you start to look at university and partnerships with the local universities and access around it. I come back to the archive. So always our challenge with archive for staff, looking after 20 shipping containers and doing, I think, sort of 1,800 engagements with individuals. Again, we're always looking at that balance of where that is. The National Portfolio Organisation and that programme of activities around it is about access and looking at different ways of accessing. And then what we want to do from that is then learn and look at how we can build on that. What funding is out there to enable us to look at those broader audiences and how we take that through.
Sorry, just to sort of add on a little bit. I was just thinking back to when I was at school, because I was at school in York, and I remember us coming into the Central Library and being taught in a really basic way, this is how you take a book out, and this is how you look at a microfiche and all those sorts of things. And then I remember going back on Saturday afternoons and actually going and doing it. And does that sort of thing still happen?
So yes, that was what was happening at Burnholm on Monday. So there was a huge screen. I mean, it was around the it's an RFID machine now, but yes, they were being shown how to take their book, how to look at the little bouncy character. The great thing about our new RFID machines is they can speak fluent pirate. So you can also have the ones in our children's section that speak pirate to you. But yes, those visits are going on, and that familiarisation is still happening to this very day. No microfiches there.
Cool. I've just got 3 questions. One drawing, one about the future. Page 59, you talk about 3 of your core contracts up for renewal. Are they going to have any big impact like Gas Electric did with you?
They are, I mean, in terms of good procurement, as you would expect, they're coming up to the end of their the contract that we have with them. So we are reviewing those. So it's just looking through good procurement. And yes, you would expect any chief executives sitting in front of you that I'll be looking for best value money in relation to that procurement with regards to them.
Cool. And then the archive stuff. I mean, is this a way that you're going to start to make money by charging people? Because people go online, these TV adverts saying, pay us to access some, historical things. Or is it just about making it available? Because there's clearly people out there who will pay. So is it just a case of you want to make it available because you've got so much, or is there opportunities for funding?
I think there's always opportunities for funding in it. So there is always that bit. So for local residents, I think it should always be accessible and free access in relation to that. I think if you look at, what have we got, 8.2 million tourists coming into York. They walk up Museum Street, they walk past Library Square. I would like just a small percentage of them to come in and buy a coffee and a postcard and something. So I think it's just looking at it in a different way. And unsurprisingly, with the background I've got, I think there are opportunities there in relation to that story of York, the sheer range of it. We talk a lot about the sort of Roman, we talk a lot about the Viking. Our archives, and similar with York Museum Trust, provide that whole history. And you can come out of the railway station, you can walk up the road, and you've got the York Museum Trust and ourselves as that gateway to the history of York. I just think there's something there we need to think about.
And just touching that, we've got 3 enthusiastic new starters, which you say over time you'll come to some agreement on how you're going to go forward. At what point in the future should we have the 3 of you back to see what progress you've actually made and how we can hold the council to account for not supporting you enough?
Possibly.
If they don't.
I can't possibly speak on their behalf, though. Absolutely. I think you need to give us a good 2 or 3 years. It takes you at least 12 months to get your head around an organisation, then start to develop the strategy. So I think, well, my expectations of myself in relation to what you see is that you start to see things coming through the next 2 to 3 years.
Cool.
Councillor Nichols. I was actually just thinking how brilliant that all these great people have come in and there is a new energetic administration at the same time. That was what I was thinking.
We all plan to be here for at least another 4 years. So I think probably 2 years is not a bad, it's midway through the point of administration. I think maybe 2 years we get you back and see progress. Cool. Any more? All done? Thank you very much. Really enjoyed that. Sorry. Mike. Obviously, we still only go up to April, but unless someone's desperate to hang around and add to May, June, July next year, I'm happy to just let it roll into next month. Are you happy, Vice?
Yeah.
Everybody else happy with just let it roll? Unless you got anything desperate you want to add on to it, obviously we've got added in next March, we'll have the send update. But apart from that, if we're all happy, I think it was a good evening's education for all. Cool. And we've no urgent business. Oh, I don't know.
I'd just like to say, I've done quite a few scrutinies and subbed on quite a few. This has probably been the most productive and collegiate one.
Oh, thank you. What a great committee you all are.
You are. No, I think all members just deferred from your shit, we're shit kind of deal.
Thank you on that very uplifting and positive note at the end of another uplifting and positive evening.